Good evening from New Delhi, India. Those of you who may not know me, I am A.J. Mandrai, Professor Emeritus of Marketing at the University of Delaware. And it is my honor, really a privilege, to serve the Journal of Global Marketing as its editor-in-chief. Today, it is with a great pleasure I am introducing Dr. Richard Bagozzi. He is Dwight F. Benton Professor Emeritus of Marketing. Dr. Bagozzi has a PhD in marketing from Northwestern University's Kellogg Graduate School of Management, an MBA from Wayne State University, a BS in Electrical Engineering from Kettering University, an MS in Electrical Engineering and Mathematics from the University of Colorado. It's not still done. And an MA in Theology and Philosophy from the University of St. Thomas. Professor Bagozzi does basic research into human emotions, decision-making, social identity, ethics, theory of mind, action, and neuroscience. This work has been applied to studying consumers, patients, doctors, salespersons, managers, military officers, and organizations. He also researches multivariate statistics and its relationship to measurement, construct validity, theory, hypothesis testing, and the philosophy of science. The methods he uses include experimentation, survey research, and qualitative research. And more recently, he investigated the biological basis of manager and consumer behavior using techniques such as fMRI, EEG analyses, and genetic and hormonal methods. Recently, Professor Bagozzi published a groundbreaking article in the Journal of Global Marketing. It's titled Behavioral Science Foundations for Global Marketing Research and Practice, the Model of Goal-Directed Behavior. This paper is the first paper, the lead paper in the recently started JGM feature topic series. And this article was published last month online. It is a must-read for professors and students alike. It's you can free access it on the JGM homepage and also on the JGM LinkedIn page. And I will encourage people to read this article. Today, our goal is, with the help of a senior editor of JGM, to explore and gain deeper insights in a conversation with Dr. Bagozzi, focusing on this article. So allow me to introduce Dr. Shiri Gandhi, who will be talking to Dr. Bagozzi about this paper. Shiri is a professor of marketing and supply chain at Eastern Michigan University, and she is deputy editor of the Journal of Global Marketing. Assisting us coordinating this is Dr. Sakshi Katuria. She is a professor of marketing at Fortune Institute of International Business. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I give it to Shiri to take over. Thank you, Shiri. And
thank you, Dr. Mandrai. Welcome, Dr. Bagozzi. It's a great privilege to be talking to you today about your research. And I believe that you're still a student, which is a very interesting thing. Would you tell us something about what motivates you to be a student yet?
Well, in what sense am I still? I mean, I've always been a student, and trying to develop my intellectual capital and knowledge, and but I'm not officially attending any university anymore. So it's self-study mostly. Yeah.
Okay. So basically you're just reading other subjects, you have
Yes.
theology and so many other degrees that you've learned from. Um, um, let's start with an overview. Could you just give us some overview to the audience? Some might have read the paper, others might not have. Could you give us some overview of the model of goal-directed behavior that you discussed in the article?
Okay. Well, it kind of germinated a long time ago in when I began in marketing, and it still occurs today to a certain extent. It's that we all borrowed methodologies from statistics and operations research,
Mhm.
and theories from psychology, sociology, and other places. So we're an applied discipline, so we borrowed a lot. But as I did that, I discovered that the theories that were developed outside of marketing often had to be adapted and fit to our context. Um, and in the course of doing that, I realized too that I saw opportunities to add to or revise those theories. I was younger then, and I didn't know how to do it well, and I wasn't able to persuade maybe the marketing journals to be receptive to these ideas, and so I I turned to for a while to psychology journals. Lacking credibility in marketing, I thought, well, maybe if I can make a contribution in the psychology area, and this would feed back into marketing. So in some sense, I always felt a responsibility that, as we borrowed ideas or took ideas from outside, that we had an obligation to give back to the disciplines that gave us those things. So around 1990, maybe 1992, in I think it was 1992, in a journal of Social Psychology Quarterly, I think it is. That's an
Okay.
official journal in the American Sociological Association for social psychology ideas. I did a conceptual article talking about the existing paradigms: theory of reasoned action, theory of planned behavior, especially, and introduced. That was the first time, to my knowledge, that the concept of desire was spoken about. So I introduced that, and it came largely from philosophy. The philosophers have been talking about desire for thousands of years, and but it's not been considered systematically in the social sciences, psychology, or in a business and marketing. But I thought it was an essential concept because it provided motivation, a motivational kind of variable to do things. And so that article in 1992 was the introduction to desire. And then it built on something that Paul Warshaw and I had done in 1990 in the journal Consumer Research. We did this article called Trying to Consume, where we looked at attitude models and said that when we're trying to do things, we can have attitudes toward trying and succeeding, and separate attitudes towards trying but failing to achieve our goal or to buy something. And then also, beyond the outcome of success and failure, we felt that we have to look at the process itself. So attitude towards the process. And then attitudes towards success and failure were, in a sense, weighted by expectations of success and failure. So it was attitudes, and we were introducing kind of judgmental variables to qualify or make contingent those kind of attitudes. Those things influenced the model of goal-directed behavior as well. But the real starting point was this Social Psychology Quarterly article where I introduced desire. And then it lay dormant for a number of years. And around the mid-1990s, I got a call from a former doctoral student, Hans Baumgartner, and I was in what we called a family room with my children, watching television, and there's a fireplace there. And this was Hans Baumgartner. And he said, well, let's do a study together, but what can we do? So I was thinking about it, and I had been immersed in the emotion literature, because emotions in psychology really exploded in the early 1900s. Before that, it was not researched much. It wasn't the main paradigm. And so I was reading that research and thinking about it, and I was really tooled up. So I proposed to Hans Baumgartner that we do a study of emotions with regard to goals, because emotions can drive goals. And one of the things I was thinking about was that with regard to goal situations, emotions are, in a sense, are contingent, because we can imagine or think about achieving a goal, which is a future activity, and how we would feel about that. And so I call those positive anticipated emotions. And just about any positive emotions like happiness, satisfaction, hope, joy, gladness, almost any positive emotion can be anticipated in terms of us thinking about, I have this goal. Now, how would I feel later if I achieved it? And then this, in a sense, came out of the article on attitudes towards success and failure. So I thought, well, I can have this goal and try to achieve it, but fail. So how would I feel then? And so all the negative emotions like disappointment and sadness and anger and worry and anxiety and many others, I can feel those emotions. So positive and negative anticipated emotions, I felt, were drivers of the decision to pursue goals, but were emotionally driven, which the attitude models neglected. Now, up to the 1990s, people in psychology and in applied areas that worked with attitudes often felt that emotions were part of attitudes. And so when they measured attitudes, they often used evaluative items, which is what we use today, but they, in addition, had a lot of emotional items like pleasant, unpleasant. So that, in a sense, emotion and attitudes were confounded. But since then, since the 1990s in psychology, emotions have found their own way and differentiated it. And so one of the main drivers of decisions in the model of goal-directed behavior was the paper that Hans did and Rick Peters, the three of us, with regard to exercising and dieting. And that came out, I think, in 1998 in the journal Cognition and Emotion. And then that lay dormant for just a few years, and a former student that I had sponsored, I think when he was an undergrad or a doctoral student, he came to Michigan and stayed with us in our home. Graduated in the University of Rome, Marco Perugini, and became an assistant professor there, and then eventually was disenchanted with the Italian system. It's a very patriarchal and difficult system to work in sometimes. And so he went to England. And so he and I brought together the desire and positive and anticipated emotions and a few other little things. I think it was 2001 in the British Journal of Social Psychology. And we called it the model of goal-directed behavior. But it was the final step in integration and building on these three articles in three different psychological journals. And so in the early 2000s, with other students, former students, Utpal Dolakia, for example, and we did a few things together using the model of goal-directed behavior. I think 3 or 4 articles in the mid to starting in the later 2000s. And then after that, I started working on other projects and kind of abandoned the model of goal-directed behavior and didn't keep touch with it. I didn't read about it or its use until about 2 years ago. 2 Korean scholars did a meta-analysis with the model of goal-directed behavior. And their meta-analysis covered 2012 to 2000. But only covered articles that were done in the tourist subfield of marketing. And there were 37 articles using the model of goal-directed behavior during those 8 years in tourism. And of course, it's been used in other areas of marketing as well, but I had lost touch of that. And so it was only in the last couple of years that I've sort of returned to it and tried to deepen and even broaden the model of goal-directed behavior, especially the work I'd done in neuroscience really helped a lot, but also work in moral, corporate social responsibility in allied areas. So being able to do this paper for the Journal of Global Marketing was a really nice opportunity for me to bring together things that have been going on and update and deepen the theory. And so that's how it all happened.
So it seems like the path of bringing in this new model has been pretty long and pretty challenging for you. And I appreciate that you recognize this aspect of anything new that needs to be done in marketing does take a lot of effort because we're so connected with psychology and other disciplines, and we draw so much from those other disciplines. And I'm fascinated with the fact that from attitudes came emotions. There is definitely a lot of other things. Like I remember when we were doing the customer engagement research, the question kept coming back as to how is that different from participation? How is that different from involvement? What is the use of having engagement in marketing? It's nothing different from these two things. So yes, the path definitely takes a long time, as I recognize from my research on engagement here. But now that the goal-directed behavior is a process-based model, and there is so much technology available out there, as you're saying, the fMRIs and EEGs, and now we have AI. The process aspect in the goal-directed behavior can be studied much more easily because you do not have to do standalone one point in time surveys or something else. You can get people's emotions and what's internally going through so many of these different technologies that are available. So do you have any specific examples in mind where researchers can use the goal-directed behavior and study the process? I know that you mentioned about tourism, but other than that.
It's a very general model, and the theory, reason, action, and theory, plan, behavior are special cases. So it could be used in any of the contexts where those models have been used. But the theory, reason, action, theory, plan, behavior, and the model of goal-directed behavior have been used primarily in survey work and not experimental. So in terms of processes, I think there's a big opportunity to use the model of goal-directed behavior in experimental contexts. And along with that, all these 3 models, theory, reason, action, theory, plan, behavior, model of goal-directed behavior, are all originally proposed as linear models. So they had independent variables and mediating variable and dependent variable, but they all had main effects. And they weren't contingent or conditional effects. So there's an opportunity in terms of process to bring in moderating effects. So we can do experimentation and use moderators, and in that way look deeper into the process. In terms of examples, I mentioned it's only been the last couple of years, so I've returned to this a little bit. There was an article that my co-author Ekta Sharma, who's in Ahmedabad, and I and another former student who visited here from Egypt a couple of years, now Dr. Mahmoud. We had an article published this year on the effects of direct-to-consumer marketing on consumers. And by the way, I should mention that much of the presentation and discussion in the Journal of Global Marketing article we're talking about today or tonight, where some of you are, it was focused on consumers, but it's also applies to managers. And Isabella Socia, another former doctoral student, and I had done a paper using the model of goal-directed behavior with salespeople. It also can be used, and I haven't seen it, there's hardly any research done, but I was thinking, after having done that, there are brand managers and assistant brand managers and advertising account managers, and they are really understudied. We look at brand decisions and other managerial decisions, but it's done at the level of the firm often, and the technology involved. But the model goal-directed behavior applies for managers, not just consumers. So Ekta and Reem and I did this study of direct-to-consumer advertising, and the direct-to-consumer advertising right now is only done in the United States and New Zealand in terms of full technology. It's done partially in some other countries like Brazil, but it's not legal in most countries. And we wanted to study it in an environment that wasn't, in a sense, contaminated by the ubiquitous advertising of direct-to-consumer in the US. If you watch news programs like CNN and other news programs today, all throughout the day, I mean, in every show, there are multiple ads for direct-to-consumer advertising. I'm sure people have experienced that, especially in the US and New Zealand. So we decided to study it in India. And we did an experiment where people saw an advertisement that had that conformed to the legal requirements. The Food and Drug Administration in the US requires that the side effects and negative aspects of drugs, if you're going to advertise them, have to be broached and shown to the audience. And so we had an ad like that conformed to the requirements of the US Food and Drug Administration. And then we had another ad where we that, in a sense, reduced the negative side effects and consequences of these ads. So we really wanted to see how consumers are processing negative information about these ads. And so the ad, we were working with students mostly in Ahmedabad, and they were looking at ads to boost their mental thinking processes, help them to be cognitively more alert, their memories were more active, etc. Kind of drugs that people use substitutes for, like Ritalin and even coffee and other things, but this was a new drug, fictitious drug, because it hadn't been marketed yet, because we didn't want to have past behavior being a factor. So we manipulated the information that people were exposed to, and saw how that information affected the variables in the model of goal-directed behavior, how it affected attitudes, positive and negative anticipated emotions, subjective norms, perceived behavioral control. But contingent on the moral identity that people had or felt. So that was our moderator, moral identity. That was how important moral behavior is to each person in their daily functioning. There's a scale for that, and we used an existing scale developed by Aquino and Marcus Reed, who's a marketer. And I think Aquino is a organization behavior professor. This is a scale that was in Journal of Personality and Social Psychology about 2002. So that was our moderator. And so we found that the greater the moral identity that people had in terms of their self-concept or self-image, the more negative they were in terms of their positive emotions towards the brand, and then more negative their attitudes were. And then that in turn influenced desires. And then we also looked at how desires influenced intentions, but we had a moderator for that. And that was kind of a self-regulatory mechanism that I touch on in the Journal of Global Marketing article. So when people have a desire, they can reflect upon their desire, and they can, in a sense, ask themselves, am I the kind of person who should have this desire and acts on that desire? Is it consistent with the kind of person that I want to be or ought to be? And even if I don't have a desire, we could ask the question, should I have a desire to do something that's important or not? So we measured their self-image with regard to regulating their desire, and found that regulated the effect of desire on intentions. So we had two different moderators operating in two different parts of the model of goal-directed behavior. And in that sense, I think it addresses the question you asked in terms of processes. So we're looking at those self-regulatory processes. We're looking at the self-image processes of moral identity, but we manipulated the information too to see how that information affected these key variables in the model of goal-directed behavior. There are other parts of the model of goal-directed behavior that involve potential for moderators. And one of those is between these 5 antecedents of desire and desire as a dependent variable. So with colleagues and, again, former students, and we have studied used clothes as a sustainable behavior. And we looked at, see if I can remember the moderators. So we looked at materialism, 2 kinds of materialism from the scale on the material self that I and other colleagues had developed. It appeared a couple of years ago or so. And then we also looked at other directed attitudes towards other people, values towards other people. And these things moderated the effects of the antecedents in the model of goal-directed behavior onto desire. So this study that I just mentioned and the previous one looked at 3 different areas within the model where moderation effects can occur, where self-regulatory like effects can occur. That's an article under review now in a sustainable area. And so we developed ads for used clothing. And people saw one of 2 different ads. So that's one way of looking at process. I think you hinted in your question too, though, that things can be done longitudinally, not just in a cross section. And I haven't seen anything done like that. I've done it in a piecemeal, simplified way. The study I mentioned with Isabella Socia looking at Salesforce people was 2 time periods. So, I mean, that's a primitive beginning way of looking at longitudinal models, but we could look at more points in time and use the model of goal-directed behavior or other models too, because longitudinal models aren't limited to the model of goal-directed behavior, of course.
Mhm.
Yeah. So processes are important. I've been thinking about it and answering your question in terms of um, the temporal dimension, especially, but processes go on with regard to, and I think all models should look at this. And one of the um, motivators for doing a model of goal-directed behavior was to look at kind of two ancient questions in philosophy. You know, if I want to know the effect of some cause on an outcome,
Mhm.
I want to ask the question, well, how does that cause produce the effect? And one of
Right.
the ways we answer that how question is to look at mediators. And
Mhm.
the model of goal-directed behavior has the key mediator is desire. And so that answers how does the independent variable influence a dependent variable? Well, it does it through a mediating variable. Uh, but a second important question, and that's why I was emphasizing moderators. The second question is, when does the independent variable or the cause produce its effect on some dependent variable? And when I say when, I mean in terms of the conditions under which the independent variable leads to the dependent variable. What are the contingencies there? And so moderators are one ways of looking at those contingencies. And I think
Mhm.
the model of goal-directed behavior lends itself to that. And the nice thing about global marketing is that it in a sense covers everything. We covers our local behaviors, but our international global orientations. And
Mhm.
it's kind of a laboratory, so to speak, for studying consumers, studying sales managers and other managers. And the already in the global area, we have all these concepts that have really given it's a strength of knowledge in the global area, have um, um, given some unique things. The original aspects of human behavior studied in global areas has come from the global marketing area. Things like
Mhm.
cosmopolitanism, um, ethnocentrism, consumer animosity, um, global identity, um, all the value things and collectivism, individualism, things that Hofstadter has and others have looked at. These are important original concepts that have really originated and flowered in the global marketing area. Um, there's an opportunity there for looking at process things of how, under what conditions and when and do these things operate. And so it says that we need to think about the situations that they are working in with regard to moderators. And so many of the variables in the model of goal-directed behavior can moderate the effects of all these important global concepts that we have. And they too can be moderators in other contexts as well. So I see the global marketing area as a giant laboratory for doing basic research, fundamental research across cultures and across countries and across economic conditions. Um, and that goes beyond the model of goal-directed behavior.
Mhm.
Although the model of goal-directed behavior, I hope, can be part of that and contribute to that. So that's another area where processes are going on and can be looked at with the model of goal-directed behavior, but
Mhm.
building on our knowledge and contributions that have been made in the global area. So there's kind of
Yes.
a marriage there, I think.
Yeah, I see that, there's lots of different things that you mentioned. I was just listening and kind of trying to take note of how many different areas the model of goal-directed behavior is scaffolding and going into. One of the things was you talked about unit of analysis. It doesn't have to be just consumer. You're applying it to salespeople, you're applying it to managers, and there is a connection between these two, because ultimately there's a relationship between the managers, what the managers do and what the consumers, how the consumers respond to it. Like you gave the example of advertising. So I believe as a researcher in the area, I think that's fascinating, that I can use the model of goal-directed behavior and I can study consumers as well as the managers, and the interaction and interlinks between the two. And then the cross-cultural understanding, that's another thing. We've had studies in different cultures separately and found different results. Let's take the Hofstede's individualism, collectivism, or other studies. And we found different behaviors, but I believe this model is going to help us do real cross-cultural studies especially for the consumers who do not. So I often wonder about this, the consumer identity aspect. We had this ethnocentrism scale, which talked about consumer identity, and it clearly assumed that a consumer is a certain country. The identity comes from a certain country. In today's world, where we are talking with each other from two different countries, and we are in two different time zones, and we are people who have probably lived in many different countries, the identity is not a particular country, right? So in this case also, it seems like, based on what you're explaining, the model of goal-directed behavior could really inform a lot of the existing concepts that we have. For instance, the concept of ethnocentrism. I think the scale was made like in 1980s by Shimpan Sharma, and that scale was focused mostly on the products, and was studying people based on their identity as being part of a certain country, right? If I was born in India, if I've mostly lived in India, I'm an Indian. But after traveling so long, I do not know who I am. How do you think this model can help us rejuvenate those concepts, especially the cross-cultural concepts like ethnocentrism? How can we rejuvenate them and bring in more relevant work into this field?
Well, maybe there are a number of things we might look at. Now, sometimes the country itself, you're mentioning that it's just not the country, and most of the time it isn't. But sometimes the country itself can be, in a sense, overbearing. Recently I was reading about how the Chinese government was using nationalism to, in a sense, encourage people to buy things domestically and to discriminate against international goods. And so sometimes the country itself, in that sense, and fomenting animosity, national animosity, can be by itself an important variable. But in most cases, I think it's what goes on within the country, which are cultural differences and differences in values and beliefs, goals and motives. These are the things that are operative but hidden, and we're only begun to study in the last few years. Now, sometimes we think there's one thing when the consumer ethnocentrism scale was developed by Shimpan Sharma, right? Was it?
Yeah.
I think it had about 23 items, something like that.
Yes, somewhere around that. And then it got reduced to like 15 items, and then it came down to 3 items, but it was all focused on product.
Yeah, exactly. And there are a couple researchers or so, I think they were Spanish researchers, who looked at, I think, 17 item, 14 item, 12 item, 10 item, 8 item, and 3 item scales. Yep. But the notion was, and I think the intent when they originally developed the scale, was that it was going to be measuring, it was unidimensional. All the items were measuring one thing. And the problem was, I think, that when people applied to scale, in across many different countries and different cultures and with people with different backgrounds. There, all the items didn't measure one thing. They were sometimes measuring two or more things. And but the users of the scale wanted to have a scale that was unidimensional. So sometimes they got down to 14 items, but they had to go as far as 3 items to measure this one thing. So I think there's an opportunity there to look at ethnocentrism and see if there are not multiple aspects of it. Now, maybe there, I haven't thought about it in depth, but maybe there are thinking aspects of ethnocentrism. There might be different feeling aspects of it. There might be normative, moral, evaluative, attitudinal like things. And these things might be distinct. And so I think there's an opportunity there. I was a student long, long ago of Donald Campbell, and he and co-author had done something on ethnocentrism, a classic book on it. Now they didn't talk about the multiple dimensions of it, but I think when we're reading about ethnocentrism, I think there are potentially these multiple dimensions. And it's not unusual when scales are first developed to think of one aspect of it, focus on one part of it. So Shimp and Sharma scale came. I think they had in mind, ethnocentrism as a single thing, single phenomenon.
Right. Yeah.
Let's develop these measures to measure it, multiple measures to measure it. The same thing happened with global identity. The work done in recent years of global identity was a small number of items to measure it as an overall concept. And I think that's normal and natural to do and important to do. But over time, as we learn more about concepts, we find that they're multidimensional. And the contingency of the model of goal-directed behavior on the material self. The material self was a scale that Ayala Ruvia and Chunyun Zi, former student, and I developed and published in the IJRM, I think 2020 or 2022, something around there. But we had 4 dimensions of materialism, basically, or the material self. And 2 of those were social dimensions. It's in a sense of trying to, through the material things that we own or buy, influence other people or being influenced by other people. Those were the 2 social dimensions. And those were the things that moderated the effect of desire and attitude, of positive anticipated emotions and attitudes on desire. And
so something like if I buy this television, this is how people will see me, so I should buy this television.
Yeah, they'll see me in a sense that I want them to emulate me. Or the alternative, the other dimension was I want to emulate other people. I want to do what they're doing. And now with regard to what we found in terms of sustainability is a social positive societal global concept. So people who are more materialistic, their emotions and attitudes had less of effect on their desire. So people who are less materialistic were more socially responsible. And I found that as well with another study with another former student, Koshnevitz, and I looked at Nike as a product, and this was in the Journal of Theory and Marketing Theory and Practice. And there the same thing happened, though, that again, because we were looking at brand coolness, and brand coolness is a concept that people who see things as being cool tend to be more individualistic and want to be unique. And so we found that the higher the materialism in these 2 social senses I mentioned, the effect of brand coolness on word of mouth, brand loyalty, intentions to buy Nike. The more materialistic you were, the less you wanted to acquire that, because things that are cool are things that make you unique. So you don't want to conformity, or kind of anti-conformity, and rebelliousness is one of the dimensions of brand coolness. So that's one area where variables analogous to ethnocentrism or cosmopolitanism and other individual difference variables from the global area, I think, can work and have influence, because they are actually conditioning the effects of these drivers of decision making in consumer behavior, or with regard to salespeople as well. So there's a big opportunity there, and people are just, I think, starting maybe to think about it. There hasn't been much empirical research, and the things I've mentioned are just the few things that we've done have just been done in the last year or two. But I see, glad it came back, because it was all these years, I think 17 years, where I didn't do anything with the model of goal-directed behavior. And I lost sight of it, and because I wasn't doing anything with it, I wasn't thinking about it, and I missed a lot of opportunities. And I think there's, I'm working now with a person, we're going to do a big meta-analysis to complement the one that had 37 studies. And because now we're finding there have been many studies, and I lost track of them, and I think people aren't aware of that. And so we want to rectify that.
No, of course. And those 37 were just in 8 years in the tourism industry only, while this model seems to be applicable not only to things in marketing, but even outside of marketing. Like, you know, it has applicability in psychology, it has applicability in sociology, it has applicability in so many other disciplines, you know, even philosophy to a certain extent, because you're going within and understanding the process of making the decision. So that's the most cool part about the model that I see. And then I believe the biggest thing that I'm kind of personally getting fascinated about is how it also applies to responsible consumption or sustainability. You just mentioned about the used clothing experiment that you had. There is, you know, mostly people talk about, well, sustainability is the government's responsibility. I'm just going to keep consuming the way I'm consuming, right? But recent SDGs, sustainability development goals, and topics are focusing even on the consumer. And it looks like people are kind of getting to agree. Scholars are agreeing that marketing also has some kind of responsibility there in terms of pushing responsible consumption. And you just mentioned some of the variables that affect responsible consumption. So I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts in terms of like how the model can be used to study responsible consumption, or how managers can push responsible consumption using the goal-directed behavior model?
Well, one possibility is that in the area of social responsibility, corporate social responsibility, consumer responsibility, the way I've studied it, and this is what deflected my attention away from the model of goal-directed behavior all those years. In a sense, I dropped the ball. This was a theory that you know, I had worked on over a long period of time, and then never championed it. Most of the people working in the theory, reason, action theory, plan behavior, their whole careers, that's what they worked on, and they were pushing that. But I never identified with these. I always saw these things as you know, the model goal-directed behavior and other models, if they're true, valid things, are part of the way the world works, and they're not my model. And I think that attitude, which I've always had, led me not to championing it or be an evangelist with regard to the model. And so, but what happened was, and it relates to your question, is that one of the directions that I turned to starting around 2012, 2013, was corporate social responsibility. And the emotional processes are a little bit different. In the model of goal-directed behavior, the emotional processes relate to goals that we have and how we would feel if we achieved those goals or failed to achieve the goals. So they're very goal-directed, and they're more reasoned. There are more deliberative, reflective processes involved there. They're not just purely emotional. But our reactions to when corporations do bad things with the environment, don't take into account climate change. When government also, some governments were climate deniers as well. So when organizations or companies, when government, and also people do bad things with regard to environment, for example, and other social responsible areas, the first reactions they have are not thinking thoughtful processes, but are emotional processes. So researchers in psychology and anthropology have studied negative moral emotions. So when I see the government acting poorly, as I read this morning, I think in the New York Times, one of the presidential candidates is suggesting that when he becomes president, will do away with the regulations for energy. And so when a person sees a government or a company doing bad things with, say, the environment, the first reaction they have is an automatic emotional reaction, one of these negative moral emotions, which are contempt, righteous anger, and social disgust. Contempt, anger, and disgust are the three emotions that people have studied there. Now, sometimes government and companies and people can do good things for the environment. And there we also react with automatically with emotions, but here they're positive moral emotions. And those emotions refer to things like admire, feel elevated, feel gratitude, feel awe, even when somebody does something extraordinarily important. So these moral emotions, positive and negative, often happen first, and they refer to emotions that we have towards others, towards companies, government, or others. But in most decision making, like with the model goal-directed behavior, we're thinking about emotions that we feel in a sense towards ourselves with regard to goal we have. So there's an opportunity, I think, to bring together this reaction that we have towards others, and where the category of moral emotions fall, and bring that into context with self-conscious emotions, which are pride, shame, embarrassment, jealousy, envy. Those are the self-conscious emotions, but they're really referring to ourselves, just like the positive and negative anticipated emotions in the model goal-directed behavior do. And the reason I mention this, because your question standing in my thinking here, almost for the first time, is that we don't want to look at moral behavior with regard to, say, the environment or corporate social responsibility as only with regard to feelings towards the perpetrators of good and doing bad in those areas. Likewise, with the model goal-directed behavior, we're not always wanting to focus only on the anticipated and positive and negative emotions with the goal that we have, because those are broad-based. They refer to almost any emotion. and we measure across the spectrum of them when we do it.
Mhm.
But sometimes we need to focus on specific emotions because the things that we're studying are a little more particular and narrow. So
Mhm.
rather than having a full spectrum of moral emotions or goal-directed emotions, sometimes we want to focus on a singular emotion, like regret. I might have regret for something I have done, um, or I might feel pride. And pride is, I think, a very important emotion in consumption that's just has been understudied. Or I might feel shame for behavior I have. Now, these are singular, discrete emotions, but these things can be accommodated and worked on within the model of goal-directed behavior, or they can be
Mhm.
studied by themselves as well. But I think one of the reasons for having a middle range theory is that when we're studying things, when we're studying dependent phenomenon, we just don't want to look at a single dependent variable there. We want to know what are a broader context where that dependent variable functions, or where the emotion that's driving it, singular emotion, function. And the model of goal-directed behavior, and to a lesser extent, the theory of planned behavior, do that. They look at the key responses in an independent variable or dependent variable we're interested in, but they do it with holding constant or within the context of other variables that approach a more naturalistic setting. And one of the motivations I had for the model of goal-directed behavior was this middle range. Now, of course, there's trade-offs there. It's not as comprehensive as a grand theory, and it's not as particular as the micro theories. Most research that's been done and will probably be done for in the future and forever will be on the micro theories because that's how knowledge is generated. And but all these particular micro theories that we have in every journal, not just the Journal of Global Marketing, um, are so particular that we don't know how to interpret them in a broader sense or how to integrate them with other particular research that's been done. So that's what I meant by research being fragmented. And the model goal-directed behavior and a need for other middle range theories for people to think about is a way of integrating some of that micro research because I think I got in a rut for many years of just doing micro research, and it's important and fun because that's how we learn new things and contribute to knowledge in our field. But there's a need to integrate the micro research, and because
And
otherwise,
that's
I can't think of. I mean, there are hundreds of studies done on sub areas of consumer behavior, and it's hard for me to think about them, and so somebody has to think about integrating that.
the
One way
linking,
of doing that is a model of goal-directed behavior, and I think but it's only one approach to it. But there's a big need for that, and this was stimulated by when I was I think a master's student even studying sociology. Herbert Spencer was a British sociologist in the late 1800s, and he proposed this concept of differentiation and integration so that when knowledge first begins, it's quite focused and it's highly differentiated. And other people add to it with other differentiated approaches. But over time, there's a need or an opportunity to integrate
think it's
those
like creating a
differential.
bridge,
Yeah, and the bridge
creating a
brings together many micro results or knowledge and theories, and so the model goal-directed behavior was maybe a crude attempt or a first step attempt to do that, but it does go further than other middle range theories that have existed, and so
I
I
actually,
don't, yeah,
I'm
that's
saying
all.
it actually just fascinates me how well the model of goal-directed behavior can become the bridge between the micro theories that you're talking about. And we could talk about all of these different variables or concepts that can be redeveloped, rejuvenated using this model, because it's also like the process-based model. It talks about structural variables and it just brings in structural variables too. I can keep talking to you, but I think we are out of time. But just one single thing that you would like to tell us budding scholars or budding researchers, what should we do?
Well, I'm maybe not the best person of giving that kind of advice, and there are many things that we should do, but I think especially for doctoral students, this has been on my mind lately, and so it may be too particular, but I've been watching doctoral students, and then when at Michigan in particular, of course, but we've hired students, and they've struggled to get to survive the system, and why? And so one of the things that I've been worrying about is that maybe we've counseled our students or forced them to publish so early while they're doctoral students, because that seems to be needed to get a job. But in the course of doing that, and to be able to publish, and we've either often not helped them to develop their own dissertation topic, but kind of handed them a topic. And so they haven't gone through the process of developing their own research perspective, of going through the trial and error and falling down and having to pick oneself up.
Thinking for themselves.
Yeah. And then secondly, in order to just get through the system, they've cut back on the coursework that the background that they've had and knowledge, and those two things, I think, have weakened their ability to, once they're on a job, when there's so much we have to do, our teaching and committees and family and research, it's hard to juggle all those things. And if we haven't gotten the foundation in terms of the coursework, thinking about things and developing our own dissertation topic, so that we maybe prematurely sometimes have gotten a publication, that we can't duplicate that once we've gotten on a job. So that I think, and then it's a lifelong thing too. It's not just what we do when we're PhD students, but we have to go through self-renewal over our entire careers. And it's hard to do that.
Right.
So
I believe,
think,
like I was saying, I believe like you kept coming back to the goal-directed behavior theory. Maybe that's one lesson that we all have from you. It's like, if you had some idea at the beginning of your dissertation, do not let it go. Just keep working on it, even slowly but consistently. And then probably one day we will be able to do something that's going to be more of a linkage. I would love to keep talking to you, Dr. Bagozzi, and maybe in person I will. We are both in the same town, so I'd love to meet you. But for now, I guess, thank you so much. It's been very, very informative and very exciting to hear your journey and to see what all can be done with the goal-directed behavior. Just for everyone else, the article is in JGM. You can go, and the article is open. Everybody can see the article. Feel free to send any questions to me if you have any, and I would pass them along to Dr. Bagozzi. Thank you so much, Dr. Bagozzi.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for all the nice questions.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a pleasure hearing you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.